Hello, everyone. Welcome to the episode 3 of our Hubble podcast series. We welcome the lead AI growth of Solana Foundation, Rishin Sharma, to the podcast. The theme today is that we have seen agents becoming economic actors instead of just giving recommendations or giving suggestions. So once agent can request, like pay and execute, even keeping human out of the loop. They need payments, they need stablecoins, they need to settle, and they need a proper financial infrastructure. I'm glad that Solana is head down onto that front, and would love to have Rish on this topic and discuss what's the current development and what's the forecast on Solana and what's the synergy between the entire agentic economy with Solana and with what we have built in Vishwa Lab. Because the big news for us is that we have launched a public beta with Solana last week, and we're currently at the top one on x402, thanks for the support of the foundation and Rishin himself. So it will be great to have a brief intro about Rish yourself and the agentic effort of Solana.
Yeah, awesome. Nathan, thanks for having me. I guess as background, I lead a lot of the agentic and AI work that we're doing over at the Solana Foundation and have been doing so for quite a while. AI at the Solana Foundation was kind of like an experimental product tooling team where we were working on shipping a bunch of different stuff. Like we shipped a Solana MCP server. We worked on RL benchmark environment for Solana coding. And we were basically kind of trying to think like, what are the really interesting surface areas where AI and blockchain technologies intersect. And I think fundamentally speaking, if you see a lot of what blockchains really do at a global level is make asset ownership and value transfer a universal property. Where the guiding principle of what we think about or have thought about at Solana for the past 5-6 years was how do we enable 5.5 billion people with an internet connection to own anything, to trade anything, and to send anything? And interestingly, I think like this idea is kind of like AI has progressed. And like you had mentioned in your intro, we start thinking about the next class of economic actors. It's no longer just 5.5 billion people on the internet we're thinking about. It's kind of like
It could be
infinite,
55 billion of AI agents,
yeah,
right?
infinite supply of agents that are onboarding to the internet that are starting to kind of like do useful things and that are fundamentally going to be able to have ways to hold value and exchange value. And this is where we believe blockchains and Solana especially could be a very elegant solution. And we kind of like dove headfirst into space. For the past 12 months, we've worked very closely with a bunch of teams, both in the blockchain space and also outside in broader tech, on thinking about deciding like what these payment protocols are, the lowest level. Solana is like one of the only networks that supports both x402 and MPP, which are like two of the primary agentic payment protocols. Beyond just the payment protocol layer, we've also thought about what are the gaps in features, tooling, infrastructure. We've been working on things like splits, so you can pay out to multiple addresses, sessions where you don't have to settle every single payment on chain. Just trying to think about how do we make stablecoins really the simplest money for agents to be able to use. Ultimately, I think we're still in the very early stages of this market. It's still not obvious that there's signs of PMF or kind of things churning out. But I think it's obvious to me and it's obvious to, I guess, many other people in the ecosystem like yourselves that are building that this is going to be kind of like generational opportunities in crypto and blockchains to kind of be a part of. And so, yeah, we're very excited about it and have teams like you guys really iterating at the frontier of it.
Yeah, definitely. Because you mentioned a very important factor about the PMF, right? Because right now, the market is still early and the
Mhm.
user adoption is still early, right? Because if we
Yeah.
go on x402 scan and we see, okay, so probably most of the use cases are, like fraction of a cents of
Mhm.
paying for APIs or high frequency payment for those tiny use cases. And so my question here, because we observe something different, because our
Mhm.
current workflow for those smart monies, they use agent to do high frequency trading in a relatively
Mhm.
higher risk tolerance area, like prediction market or like commodity perps or all of those. So I'm just wondering on a bigger scope, because you basically monitor the entire AI space and Solana ecosystem. So from your observation, what are agents paying currently, and what are agents transacting currently on a larger scale? Is that still predominantly a fraction of cents of API calls, or have you seen any bigger trend for like bigger amount?
Yeah. So I think that it's kind of interesting, like how it's evolved, right? Like activity started picking up in October. In the first place, back then, there were a lot of people kind of buying meme coins and doing stuff like that. And we've thought quite a bit about this, like what are the relevant areas? What are the kind of transactions? And there's a pretty
Mm-hmm.
interesting chart that Artemis has published, maybe, which is basically the median transaction size of X402 over time. And so in the early days, like, when people were buying memes or people were simulating volume, maybe doing test transactions, the median transaction size was a couple of bucks per transaction.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think you saw a lot of like testing of people literally just using the 402 protocol layer to be able to just do message passing. And so like they would charge a ton of, and I think you guys were like an early tester in this space. And
Yes, I
back in
mean that's for.
February, drove down kind of median transaction cost to almost a cent or sub-cent in some cases. And today, I think it's normalized to around 40 to 50 cents per transaction across the board. And I think that for the timing kind of like makes sense when you see the most popular server use cases for X402 outside of these
Mhm.
full stack applications, people paying for data, people paying for inference. And that's roughly the price point at which this comes out to. And I think
Mhm.
I would expect that to continue to normalize over time. One of the first use cases that I thought was really cool and fun was the Perch team was working on where you could check out like things with Amazon. But that's only really applicable if people have stablecoin balances that they want to spend. It's not maybe too much of an unlock to the consumer. But not having to sign up for an API and just being able to call and pay a balance like 20 cents, 30 cents, I think is a much cleaner use case. And that's where we're seeing more activity normalize. But yeah, I'd be curious from your perspective how you guys have evolved, how you use 402 within Vishwa, like how that's shifted over time.
Yeah, because basically, you raise an important point of how the economy is constructed over X42, right? Because some people just directly use X42 as a gate, like the pricing gate of their existing service.
Yep.
Well, our business model is similar to Robinhood, that we basically charge very minimal for people to access our service, and we
Mhm.
actually take a cut over their profits or their
The
transaction
trade.
volume.
Yeah. The actual
Yes.
execution. Yeah. So the business model is you want the transaction to be as cheap as possible, right? It's the spread that you make.
Access of our service to be as
Yep.
cheap as possible, but we still want it to be gated so that there won't be like a DDoS, there won't be like, because if you're running TE for high frequency trading, let's say someone just use a script to generate 10,000 different addresses, that could
Yep.
explode your server like immediately. But
Yeah.
if you still have that X402 gate, that at least they have some cost to
Hmm.
perform the attack. And they have not just from like the economic cost, but also the time cost or the
Hmm.
operation cost, because at least they need to sign over that 10,000 wallet, right? Like to access whatever has been gated behind. And Robinhood has been given a very interesting business model to infrastructure builders like us, because you leverage down, right? You flatten out the quote unquote cost for accessing your service. I mean, Robinhood did it by selling the order book to Citadel, but
Yep.
we did it mostly because if you're using agents, since we observe all of the transaction data and all of their performances. So if you're using agents to run those arbitrage strategies, which are those crazy Cloudbot did back in January or even back in December when they're using agents to do high frequency trading on hyperliquids. So
Hmm.
their performances are definitely a bit higher. I would say 20% higher than the delta neutral like strategy is like 6% versus like 5%. So if you're running a relatively larger amount on asset curation or on your own personal money, because if they are trading in a very high volatile market, like poly market or like perps, your single wrong decision making could drain your entire portfolio. So that's what our value add is, right? Because when you set your original mandate to your agent before letting it run, and our infrastructure check against that standard or that mandate before whenever that decision has been executed. Because I mean, your foundation model, let's say even the cheapest one or the simplest one, give you like a 20 to 30 seconds of latency for each of the decision-making process. And that will be a huge loss because perp has huge leverage on there and market can drift a lot in that 30 seconds to more than a minute. So
Yep.
it is very important for them to let their agents sit within their original mandate. And that's where our value add is. And that is why we are able to get on the top of the entire ranking, quote unquote. I will say, because our use case is a bit different from the fraction of cents kind of thing. So probably that's my own perspective.
I think that it's kind of interesting because like there's no universal business model in a sense. And even just using 402 as like a gateway for kind of preventing spam or DDoS, like that
Oh,
makes a ton of sense. And even I saw 0x yesterday launched a swap API for this as well. And it's kind of like a similar model, right? Where obviously the business
yeah.
model is not here. Uh, like it's not like you're trying to monetize the API, right? And that's going to make you money. It's more just like kind of how the user accesses the service.
Yeah, because the most of the question that I've received from both investors as well as those TradFi people saying that, okay, if agents are only transacting over a fraction of a cent per payment, doesn't make economic sense because your gas fee probably costs more than what you pay for the gate itself.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, so basically that's what people are trying to figure out. So, I mean, the next part is definitely the follow up on this because given that Solana it has very high throughput and able to process all of those transactions in a pretty lightning speed, why do agents even need to have its own native payment rails? Because we have seen, Visa Crypto Lab, they do Visa CLI right over their cards. And I know that you guys are collaborating with MasterCard's Agent Pays regarding their stablecoin settlement. So take a step back. Like, why do agents even need a native payment rail?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I've seen different people frame this as kind of like a cards versus stablecoin kind of approach. But to be honest, I don't even view it that way. I think that we're so far from this market being zero sum at all. There's like so many opportunities for both stablecoins and cards within this context across multiple parts of the stack. And yeah, that's where Visa and MasterCard have been fantastic collaborators more than anything, as like kind of everyone is trying to navigate and figure out how this space is going to play out. Like, why do agents need native payment flows? I think for a while they didn't, but I think we're at a point in scaling of kind of model performance and harnesses. And we're with coding agents specifically hitting a point where the level of utility is kind of like breaking some sort of threshold. And the next limitation, kind of like what your agent can do for you, is fundamentally going to be based on what it's able to access and call. And so obviously things like MCP and A2A have existed for a while. But
Hmm.
even within this set, businesses are thinking about how do I monetize the agent as my next customer? And you can still obviously integrate an API key within your MCP. But just to give you an example, today we were like just talking in our Slack, Solana Foundation uses Brex. And we were thinking about how do we use Brex MCP to actually be able to submit transactions and reimbursements. And it's read only, right? So you can't even like
Hmm.
write an expense report into Brex using their MCP. So for all intents and purposes, it's not that useful for me. And I think a lot of companies that are launching MCPs are doing this where like the MCP is like a subset of the use because like that's their main business. They don't want to fully expose this. And so there's this new way that they need to be able to build
They're
monetization
taking
around it.
cuts on the
Yeah,
settlement itself, right? So they
of
definitely don't
course.
want to open that.
And have an incentive for kind of like pushing out products via an MCP. But I think they do if they're able to monetize it in the same way, one to one. And I think this makes the work around all these agentic payment rails very obvious as kind of like the future business model for kind of like how companies are going to be able to sell their services. It's basically a general marketplace problem where you need to solve for the supply side and demand side. So increasingly, we're seeing more merchants come around to this idea of how do we start monetizing business from agents and
Hmm.
scrapers. Another example here, last week, AWS in their Bedrock product, like they basically offer DDoS scraping prevention
Hmm.
service that has existed for a really long time. You're a web publisher, you don't want bot scraping, like they're attributing to traffic, but you're paying for it and you're not monetizing it at all,
Mm-hmm.
you conventionally can just block that activity. Like today, they paywalled that behind x402. So instead of just blocking all the bot traffic that you're getting, you can say if a bot wants to visit this website, LLM scraper wants to visit this website, it's going to cost like 1 cent or 2 cents. So either you can use that to offset the compute costs like that it takes for these people to visit the site, or like literally this is your new business model, right? And so I think we're seeing more merchants kind of come on board. Like the
Mm-hmm.
merchant inflection is starting to happen. And I think downstream of that, we're going to see these power user type use cases really show the demand side of what people can do and compose across it. And so, yeah, that's kind of how we're thinking about that.
Yeah, I mean, well, we can echo upon that because our
Hmm.
upper streams are like agent authorizers and agent builders, right?
Hmm.
So when we're seeing those open source model trying to quote unquote monetize their thing, for instance, like, do you know the open source model called QN?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so basically, people who develop QN, they try to use QN to build their own agents. And
Hmm.
one of the most important monetization rail is on the finance.
Mm.
So management of the treasury, like curation of the vaults, the running strategies and the risk management over a delta neutral, like very conservative pool. Because essentially, for instance, like Alipay, right? Alipay is like the largest neobank across the world.
Hmm.
One of the product, like their retail user for the idle money, they just put it to something similar to a checking account. They
Hmm.
give you like a 2%, like 3%, just similar to the
Hmm.
Robinhood saving, something like
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically using agent to managing that vault, quote unquote, or that liquidity pool sounds very interesting. But they're kind of afraid that their agents are not making the right decision or like making decisions out of like the compliance requirement and whatsoever. So that's where they need our control.
Guardrails and safeties and permissions. Yeah, because it's a big jump from letting your agent write something for you or even do something like submit a pull request to actually let it manage literal
Touching the money,
dollars,
right?
right? It's a massive shift and change, but it's really exciting and it's really interesting, like of a problem to work on.
Yeah, I mean, we are still waiting for that multiple signal to converge to like a unified PMF on our end.
Mm.
So
What
that's
do you mean by multiple signals in that case? Yeah.
because for multiple signal, like we discussed previously, over
Hmm.
like and the HF trading is definitely one of them. Those are
Hmm.
more retail facing or more high risk tolerance. And the second phase is definitely the treasury management, the curation. Those are per transaction. The volume is very high, but the frequency itself is not that high. And the third part is definitely on the payment and the FX side, and also the remittance because that need essentially generate from the multiple corridors and the multiple vendors on the quote provision. So instead of single chain FX or single centralized RFQ, there are like multiple vendors on the FX or the remittance that they're providing different quotes to the trading desk. And they're currently hiring like more than 200 to 300 people try to do the optimized order matching because there are multiple constraints from that remittance, like the supply side of things. Just for instance, sometimes they have extended deadline that they don't really need to get the money immediately, but they're looking for a better exchange rate. For some other cases, they are, they
Yeah, and
want
this is kind
immediate
of stuff
settlement.
that like LMs are really good at in terms of researching and indexing a lot of data from a different providers. But
I mean,
yeah,
even
yeah, you have to
GPU3
pair
is
that with
great at writing
execution.
SQL.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so those are the scenarios that we have seen. Like that's why we call it like a multiple signal, also including the potential collaboration with those RWA issuers, right? Because they really want agents in addition to human being to own, to purchase, to run strategy over their RWAs and also in the like a GPU computation market, the GPU future market, as well as the load balancing of those electricity, right? Because those are the people who are more AI native because people who use data center GPU computing power are mostly like foundation model builders or agent builders, right? So those are like a multiple signals that we have seen on our side, but we still need to converge everything into a single product market fit. That's why our public launch, our public beta will continue all the way till the end of next month, and we will upgrade to V2 that incorporate the RWA part, incorporate the GPU trading part, the computation power part, as well as the electricity part.
That makes a ton of sense.
And the next question is actually on the x402 and the synergy of Solana on between each of those like quote unquote neutral like payment standard and transaction standard. Because I will say there are like more than 10 standards in total in this market.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe there'll be more by the end of the year. Yeah.
Right, that's what I'm saying, right? So basically, I'm wondering how Solana's viewpoint on each of those standards and who you think that is going to take over for major product, like for instance, significant product market fit or dominance of the entire market.
We definitely had some conversations internally of whether we want to build, a Solana preferred agentic payment protocol or standard. But I think ultimately it doesn't make a ton of sense to do that. That's kind of what's happening right now, where, different
Everyone has its
consortiums
own
of
standard,
groups are
right?
building their own standard. And I
Yes.
think our view is what makes Solana really powerful is that it really is this like universal payment layer that can permissionlessly exist across any protocol. So just to give you an example, like our x402 implementation was built by a community member, notorious dev over at PayAI, like entirely. Like it wasn't something that anyone had to ask permission for or the foundation had to do or stuff like that. And then secondly, when Tempo launched MPP, Solana launched support within the first kind of 48 hours. And I think that's really the power of this global kind of permissionless network, where I think that's really what we're betting on as what the winning ingredients are. Like for some protocols, merchant still needs to be approved, buyer needs to be approved to be able to actually contribute. There's requirements, specs. Solana is like truly universal. Anyone can do anything with it. They don't need to talk to me or anyone at the team or Toli or whoever they need to. That's kind of like the real network effect that we kind of see, where it's like, how do you just build this universal global money layer that doesn't require any permissioning? And I think a layer on top of that is like when you think of composing the stack of what does agentic payments on Solana look like, whereas like some companies are building full stack where there's a private company that's behind like a payment rail. Like the payment rail
Hmm.
might be permissionless, but it's still a private company that runs the validator or most of the network. No such thing exists in Solana, right? Where there's no like Solana preferred wallet. There's no such thing as a Solana preferred on ramp. Like a full stack solution versus kind
Hmm.
of like an interchangeable permissionless stack. And we really believe that those are the reasons why Solana is going to kind of perform really well from kind of just like a tech ethos perspective. And then
Hmm.
from a network perspective, it's like tried and tested nature that Solana has functionally been built for trading. Like today we have 400 millisecond block times. By the end of the summer, it'll be down to 200 milliseconds. Average transaction cost is 1,000%. Localized fee markets, like all of these things have been proven out at scale. If you look at transaction volume on Solana, it's like the next 5 networks combined. And so it's really battle tested infrastructure on that sense. And then I think another piece of this, which is really big, is stablecoin liquidity is also roughly like $15 billion have been minted on Solana across USDC, USDT, PYUSD, bunch of others. And so that's actually makes it pretty simple for a new developer, new user to kind of get into the network. And if you think about what system or what protocols agents will use, like, of course, like security and things like that are things that we're digging into. But also like permissionless universal ones are going to be preferred systems or betting.
I mean, that definitely echoes back to what we have discussed previously, right? Like why settlement speed and cost really matter for those agent payments, right? Because,
Mhm.
like you mentioned, the block time is like 100% improved in the summer, right? So all the way down to like 200 millisecond. Because for our infrastructure latency is around the same scale. So adding additional signature check and the policy check, definitely around 100 milliseconds or even shorter than that. So definitely around the same additional latency, adding up to the whole agentic payment stack will not introduce the disastrous like aftermath if let's say the whole block time increased to like T plus one, right? Like a T plus two for existing cash payment rail or like a credit card payment rail, right? So that's important. And the second part, echoing back to the institutional collaboration that we have discussed previously, because you guys have collaboration with MasterCard, you guys have collaboration with Ondo, and all of those big names, what need to happen before institutions actually trust both agents and the stablecoins or their RWAs? Because you mentioned about multiple steps of leaping forward, right? First, they need to acknowledge that stablecoins is useful. Second, they need to acknowledge and adopt the agent is actually useful. And third, they can open up their channel for all of the agents because, I mean, I have early access of Visa CLI, right? But that's very limited to multiple, 6 to 7 different vendors.
Yep.
So I'm just wondering, what's your thought over these 3 leaps? Like what really institutions need to do before they adopt the entire thing?
Yeah, I think one good thing is that we're seeing the rate of disruption very rapidly. So I think large companies have like an incentive to iterate and innovate very quickly because it's innovate or get disrupted, right? I think that's very, very clear. And so this is why I feel like there's been a lot of commentary about it. Like, CEOs of huge companies have like, AI psychosis where they're telling all their product teams and they're telling all their tech teams, use AI as much as possible, experiment, see what sticks. It's very much a push versus pull model. I think it's funny, like, 3, 4 years ago, I was chatting with another founder who's building in the space who used to work at Stripe. Stripe was launching Solana stablecoins as kind of a payment method that people could use and check out. This was in 2022, and it took maybe 6 months of back and forth on aligning on the comms of how it was going to be messaged. They wanted to be very careful about any mentions of blockchains or crypto
To
or
even
stablecoins.
start like working on it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Literally just to accept stablecoins as a payment method, right? Like
Mm.
that's all it was. And today they're literally launching their own blockchain, right? It's like you couldn't have a more different environment. And so it's like you've gone from very cold start to very fast moving from the like test side. So right now, like you had mentioned, I think we are in this test phase of things where people
Hmm.
want to experiment. They want to see what exists. They want to be involved. And so there's like huge incentives for these companies to put out announcements and consortiums and stuff like that. That's the first step. But the true innovation is going to happen at the frontier of builders that are experimenting on kind of like entirely new product primitives
Hmm.
like yourselves that might kind of like open up a entirely new market opportunity that didn't exist because that's what this fundamentally is, right? This isn't like a 1 to 2 improvement where it's like before we accepted credit cards and now we accept stablecoins where it's just like a small feature change. This is like an entirely new paradigm shift where instead of human user, an agent user is kind of like the primary focus. And so that takes like frames the scale of this much more. I think it's been exciting to work with a lot of these institutions because, yeah, they are moving very fast. It's not, oh, like we want to experiment and see. People are very motivated to get stuff done. And there's more stuff in the pipe. And every day you see like a new enterprise kind of enter the mix.
Yeah, I mean, because from our conversation with those institutions, is that you mentioned a very interesting point of a pull versus push model. Because basically, whenever they previously mentioned about like a non-AI stuff, there are a lot of politics going on inside, right? Like someone want it, someone don't want it. But right now, as long as they involve, like the term of AI, like to the board meeting or to this, like the C-suite meetings, I mean, no one is gonna stand up straight and go against it, right? Because they don't want to make themselves seem stupid. They just like the entire AI concept, people are defensively adopting it because they
Yep.
want to keep themselves up and make sure that they are not losing the entire game. So although they might hesitate or they might still spend a lot of time exploring where to go, but they already reached the consensus that they should go.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, that's exactly where we are. It's been cool to see that shift.
Yeah, that naturally leads to our last question, given both your background in Solana and your background in CoinFund. So what
Mhm.
both builders and investors should focus next? Because like we discussed for the whole series, right, the shift is coming.
Yeah, I think for builders, this is one of the most exciting times working. It is a challenging market, I will say, in the sense that there are false flags, like we talked about at the beginning, like of PMF, right? Like today, I wouldn't say that there's a company, there's not obvious revenue that you can go
Hmm.
after to scale up, right? Say, like I was starting a AI startup in an established industry where there's real customers that are willing to spend revenue. Agents aren't spending at scales that like, like really merit like a massive market. Like the market TAM literally today, I think is like something that is like not huge, but it's like you have to build towards what exists in the future. Timing the market is one of the most challenging things. I would say builders, it's a great opportunity to experiment with different primitives, especially on the merchant side of things. So try building like composing across different services. I think this is something you guys have done really well. Like teams like TripStack and others have built these full stack applications, which are using x402 behind the scenes, but like the user completely abstracted. Like see what new experiences you can put together. And then I think like out of that, it's going to be interesting to see like what sticks. Like even like, like the fantastic team, like the Merit Systems team, like when they built like for a two scan, like the like Canonical Explorer, it was in no intention, like, the product that they thought they would be kind of like shifting the focus of the entire company to. But I mean, that kind of happened when they saw it blow up. So you never know what's going to inflect. The room is still really small, which is pretty exciting. I feel like I see you all the time. I feel like I see the same 30 or 40 people all the time. But, I think like in 1 year or 2 years, it's going to be a much bigger room and it'll have paid dividends to just be there early. There's still alpha. Yeah.
Yeah, for our own experience, definitely talking to customers in their own shoes will be crucial because a lot of those real business, it's always good that to adopt the go-to-market strategy directly from both traditional industry and the AI industry, right? Because AI industry has a very good term for deployment, right? They just send one role, like one person who does sales, engineering, and PM all the way together and sit there with their client and deploy whichever solution and iterate that solution on the spot, right? So that part of the agent payment and the agent transaction, like builders should really adopt because those are the skill set that you need to convince your client because our industry is new, right? We need to tell them in the language that they could understand that there is a value. And that's what we did to a lot of our institutional users. And the
Yeah.
second thing they need to adopt is to educate the market in a way that is not showing off, like, hey, I'm cool because I'm building something new, right? It's just like,
100%.
it's cool not because I'm building something new, but it's also because it's transforming and is useful. That's
Yep.
essentially our take when we're to go to market and approach all of our clients. So
Totally.
yeah, thanks, Rishin, for coming in. It's been a very fruitful 40 minutes of discussion. And for all of the audiences, please be no hesitate to reach out to us, reach out to Solana Foundation. And if you're a builder, definitely Solana is a great place to build. And if you're a developer willing to work on the agent payment, agent transaction, and utilizing your own Rails, utilizing Solanas, utilizing any other existing Rails, right? Just join the community, build a community bigger, build the industry bigger. So our vision is definitely to build the agent native banking infrastructure and that whole thing in public beta launch on Solana first and help Solana to become an agent native bank or like the money layer of the agent. So stay tuned for our V2 upgrade at the end of July so that most of the non-developers, because I know currently it's mostly developers who are using our product, but it will definitely be great to have all of the non-developers participate in our journey.
Yeah. 100%. It was great chatting today, Nathan, and look forward to the next one.